So it seems I'm a bit late to the party on this one, but I love talking about the next generation of consoles, as I have done many times on the channel. So when I hear news about anything to do with the PlayStation 5, especially with the DualShock 5 news that we've gotten this week, I'm going to talk about it. So for those of you who don't know, earlier this week there was a patent that Sony in Japan filed for a new controller, a new DualShock controller, which would presumably be the DualShock 5. Now, obviously, to get this out of the way early, when it comes to patents and these kind of legal documents that are publicly filed so everyone can see them, they're not always the final controller, and they're not always something that we ever actually see as a product. So take this with a grain of salt. This may very well not end up being something we see. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the patent, let's talk about what it looks like, and specifically link it to the information that we've already received about the controller via some of the Wired articles detailing the PlayStation 5 thus far. So as you can see, this looks almost exactly like the current PS4 DualShock 4 controller. I think personally that the DualShock 4 as it currently stands is a fantastic controller for the most part, bar a few issues that I do have with it, but I think it's a great controller, and I think it's good to see that. Again, I'm making the full assumption that this is DualShock 5 for the purpose of this video, for the purpose of this discussion. I think it's great that Sony had just taken what's great, taken what works, and just clearly making minor improvements upon it. So, despite at first glance it looking pretty much the same, there are some physical changes to the controller. This new iteration has no light bar, which is interesting because the light bar as it currently functions, obviously it has some functionality with games where colours will light up and indicate health and weird little gameplay things, but for the most part I think it's fair to say that the light bar isn't really used in regular gameplay. It does, however, have a primary use with the PSVR headset. So with this DualShock 5, it's interesting that the fact that this controller has no light bar, how exactly that would work with the next iteration of PSVR with PS5, I don't know, I assume that there's going to be some kind of workaround with that Sony has in mind, but I think the fact that it has no light bar is great news because my knowledge of hardware, as you may know, is very limited. I don't really understand a lot of technological kind of things, but as we know, the DualShock 4 has a pretty horrific battery life, especially compared to the competitors with the Switch controller and Xbox One controller. The DualShock 4 just doesn't hold up battery wise, and that's, I think it honestly is my main criticism of that controller, and I think a key reason why the battery never really lasts long is because that light is always on with the light bar, which naturally is going to be draining a lot of battery. So the fact that there's no light bar this time around should, at least in theory, increase the battery life of the controller, which is a huge thumbs up from me. Thank you. Currently on the PS4, I believe that we only have the option to dim the light, but we can't turn it off. To my knowledge, I could be wrong about that. Please let me know if I am, I'd love to turn it off. We can see the sticks are a slightly different size, which I don't know how much that matters really. And overall, the controller itself, the proportions of it are slightly condensed and slightly different. It actually looks, from a form factor perspective, slightly more like the Xbox controller. Of course, the analog sticks are in the same position below the D-pad and below the face buttons, which is great. I think that's kind of a great thing that PlayStation does. That is obviously a staple of the DualShock controller, so no surprise that's staying the same. But at the end of the day, from what we can see here, it looks like minor changes to make it slightly more comfortable, and I'm all about that. It's also going to have USB-C functionality when you're charging the controller, which is something we've already heard about in the Wired articles, and again, that's cool. USB-C, to my knowledge, is a very efficient method of charging stuff, so if it charges my controller quicker, hell yeah, I'm all about it. And we can also get a look at the slightly different triggers that we'll be using, and again, as detailed in the Wired article, they've already previously talked about some of the changes they're making to the triggers, where there will be some kind of, I don't know how you'd describe it really, but there will be some degree of trigger sensitivity, I guess is the best way to describe it. And they use the example of drawing a bow and actually feeling the effects of the bow and the friction of you pulling down the trigger, if that makes any sense. I'm probably describing that absolutely terribly. But in short, the DualShock 5 triggers are going to have some kind of resistance or extra sensitivity to them to kind of add immersion to some experiences, which kind of cool, I guess. I don't know exactly how that will play. Really, that's something I'm just going to have to test out for myself to see if that's something I'm into or not. But in theory, it sounds kind of interesting, I guess. And that kind of approach is coupled with something, again, that we can't tell or see physically from the patents, but that we know from the Wired articles, that there will be a new and improved version of the rumble feature, kind of akin, I guess, to HD rumble that the Nintendo Switch uses, which just adds more detail and dynamics to the rumble feature in the controller. I think most gamers are on the same page with me, where I just don't really give a crap about rumble or the trigger sensitivity stuff, you know, whatever. Doesn't really bother me. The last big, I guess, thing to talk about, or potential surprise with this pattern, is the fact that DualShock 5 will once again keep the touchpad from the DualShock 4. I'm honestly surprised by this. This took me back. If I were a betting man prior to this coming out, I would have said, oh, the touchpad, they're gonna drop that 100%. Nah, they're keeping the touchpad, they're committing to it. And that's a surprise simply because we've seen very little games, very little Sony first-party titles, let alone obviously any other game, implement any kind of functionality or any kind of useful or innovative functionality for the touchpad. We've seen, you know, every now and again a game comes along and lets you swipe the touchpad in some QuickTime events like Detroit does, or lets you swipe the touchpad to open a certain menu faster, and that stuff's fine, I guess, but at the end of the day, we've seen it not used at all to its fullest potential, because at the end of the day, inherently, it just feels like a gimmick. It very much felt like that, I think, when PS4 was revealed. It kind of still feels that way, but they're keeping it around for some reason. As to why, I don't know. Maybe they've got potential new ideas for it that could make it more interesting. Maybe they're, for some reason, now deciding to double down on functionality with it in exclusive titles, maybe? I don't know. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, considering they could have done this years ago, but I don't think that's a very good explanation, but it could be one, I guess. Maybe developers like it for some reason. Dude, I've got absolutely no idea why they're keeping the touchpad, but hopefully that's something that when the PS5 is fully revealed and we see the controller, maybe we'll get some answers regarding that. I don't know. I think it's strange though, especially since it could be potentially, again, another thing that eats up more battery life. I don't know. Considering most games just use it as a select button and nothing else, it feels like kind of a waste of space on the controller, but hey, I guess we'll just have to wait and see exactly what plans they have for it, if any at all. So overall, I think the biggest takeaway with the DualShock 5 pattern, assuming that it's real of course, is that there's very little difference between it and DualShock 4. And I think that's a really good thing, because I love DualShock 4, I think it's a fantastic controller. I'd be more than happy if they just honestly didn't change the controller, with the exception of I'd really like them to improve the battery life, which it seems like they're doing, along with adding some potentially cool rumble stuff. So yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing groundbreaking going on with this controller. It looks interesting, the touchpad was an interesting choice to keep around, but other than that, if it's a slightly more comfortable DualShock 4 with a better battery life, I'm going to have absolutely no complaints. I'm totally on board with it. But who knows, maybe in a few months when it's all fully revealed, this isn't at all what the DualShock 5 will be. Let me know in the comments what you think of DualShock 5. If you're new to the channel, be sure to consider subscribing, that'd be greatly appreciated. I'll see you all in the next video. This has been SirCazz, farewell.